Story time. Many times I'm asked, what are the things that have most affected and influenced the way that I see the world? And I talk a lot about perception and how perception is so important, making sure that you have multiple different perspectives. I said perception, but I meant perspectives on things, and seeking out, finding people that have different perspectives from you are so critically important to being a success. One of the exercises I've asked my team to do for the month of October is to learn how to write the alphabet upside down and backwards. Why do I do that? Well, number one, it's really hard to do. We all know the letters. We all know the order of the letters. We know what they look like. We've done it hundreds of thousands, if not millions of times. We've seen these letters, but inverting them and reversing them in your mind and then trying to bring that and draw that down on paper and convince your hand to do it is quite difficult. The reason I do it is because it takes different neurosynapses. It takes different things inside your brain to do that. And it will help us to think more efficiently about the problems that we're trying to resolve for customers. But I want to tell you a story, because this story is probably, of any story I've ever heard, it's probably the one that influenced me the most and changed my life, my opinions, my stress level, the way that I approach and handle problems. I think it's changed my relationships. It's changed my religious beliefs. It's changed really everything about me. And the story goes like this. Thousands of years ago, there was a man in China that had a prized horse. And this horse was known far and wide as this sort of amazing specimen. And people around him thought he was very fortunate for having this horse. One day, the horse ran away. And the neighbors came to him and said, "We're very sorry for your misfortune. We feel bad for you." And the old man said, "Who's to say what's good or what's bad?" And the neighbors sort of left stunned. Okay, the guy isn't really affected by this. Well, the next day the horse returns, and with it brings 9 other stallions, and they all run into his stables. And the neighbors see this, and they come to him and said, "Oh, we've got a feast for your great fortune. Gods have favored you," and all of these things. And the man said, who's to say what's good or what's bad? And that evening, his son went out to try to break one of these stallions and hopped on its back and was thrown off and severely injured and broke his leg. And the neighbors saw this and came to him and said, we are so sorry for your great loss and misfortune. And the man stopped him and said, "Who's to say what is good and what is bad?" And the next morning, the king's army marched through town to conscript all the young men to take them to fight an unwinnable war across the sea. And they took one look at his son, and he couldn't go because he had been injured. And the lesson really to learn there is that who is to say what's good or what's bad? Many times in our lives, we are faced with situations and circumstances, and at the time we judge them very quickly based upon their merit at that moment in time. Maybe you win the lottery, or you land a big customer, or you've finally got that contract in place with Walmart, or whatever that thing might be. And you want to celebrate, and you want to pop champagne, and you want to get excited about it, and you want to do those things. And there's a time for that. But many times, retrospectively, when we have the wisdom of time on our hands, we look back on those things and we realize that they weren't what we thought they were. Anybody who's ever been in a relationship that failed knows that all too well. There was a moment in time where you probably thought this is the one. And now looking back 5, 10, 15, 20, 25 years later, you say, thank God. I like to say that in the immortal words of the great Western philosopher Garth Brooks, sometimes I thank God for unanswered prayers. We don't know what's best for us many times. And it's very easy to judge situations and circumstances based upon what we're faced with today. But it's much more difficult to step back and say, I'm going to give it a little bit of time and see what happens here. I think in my career, I've become much more patient. I used to be a whack-a-mole type manager. I'd see a problem and I would try to solve it. And I think still to this day, so many executives and leaders do that. But it's almost exclusively a really bad idea. It's much, much better to go through a systematic approach to that, to get multiple opinions on it, to hire experts, to bring in other people that have a different perspective, that can help you understand better how to resolve that thing. And then I think it's really important retrospectively to go back after the fact and say, was it a good or a bad thing? Like if I could change what I did in that moment, would I have done it differently? I've been working on a quote here for the last couple of weeks, and I'm going to write something on it. It's a little bit of a story. It goes back to somebody I know that is very, very intelligent, one of the most intelligent people probably here in the US. He is a rocket scientist, right? So really knows his stuff. And he once told me, he said, when we're trying to solve really difficult rocket sciencey type challenges, we don't go to other rocket scientists. Those rocket scientists went to the same lectures as us. They've read the same books and the same papers. They went to school with us. They're in our same social networks. They don't have a perspective that's any different than ours. And if they do, why the hell didn't they work for us in the first place? So what I summarized the conversation with him down to this one sort of nugget, and that is that, let me just read it to you because I have it here on my phone, and I sometimes have to go back and look at it because it really is impactful when you think about it. People who think like us have to be smarter than us to solve us problems. The exact opposite is also true. People who don't think like us don't have to be smarter than us to solve the problems that we have because they have a different perspective. They see things differently. And that's really critically important when it comes to business decisions, when it comes to life decisions. It's so easy here in our Western culture to think that things are black and white. From a religious perspective, Christianity brings us up in this idea that there's good and there's evil, and that good comes from God and evil comes from Satan. And the reality is that when we look retrospectively on our lives and our decisions, we find that that is not always the case. Sometimes the best things that happen to us turn out to be the worst, and sometimes the worst things that happen to us turn out to really shape our lives. And we're, retrospectively looking later on going, that was actually a pretty good thing. So I want to leave you with that today. I think it's important to understand in your business. It's important, particularly right now when we're in a tumultuous time, and decision-making and critical thinking is at the utmost importance. And it's very much needed in everybody's businesses. Don't make decisions based upon, today, but try to take a perspective of the future. Try to get other people's perspectives and bring those into the conversation, because that's the only way that you're truly going to make a solid, good decision. And don't put emotion in it. It's so hard. We are emotional creatures. It's so hard to take the emotion out. But I will tell you that even just going through that story in my mind, and I remind myself of that story all the time, it helps me bring the emotion out of it. Because now I look at it and go, I don't know if this is good or bad. It just is what it is. And I'm just going to deal with it in this moment in time. Later down the road, I'll retrospectively look at it and see how my decision was. And then I can improve that decision-making going forward. All right, until next time.